You think you know how Milton Friedman destroyed socialism in debates. You've seen the clips, the calm smile, the devastating one-liner, the stunned socialist unable to respond. You've watched him dismantle Phil Donahue's greed question. Maybe you've shared those videos when your progressive friends posted about democratic socialism being different. But here's what nobody tells you. You're watching a highlight reel without understanding the game. Those quotes that went viral, they weren't just clever comebacks. They were the visible tip of an intellectual methodology so powerful, so systematically constructed, that once you understand it, you'll never lose an economic debate again. Not because you'll memorize Friedman's lines. Anyone can do that, but because you'll understand the logical architecture that made those lines devastating. Think about your last argument about socialism. Your friend said Scandinavian countries prove democratic socialism works. Or, we need government to fix healthcare. Or, free markets caused the 2008 crisis. You had a response, something about Venezuela or competition or government intervention. But did your response in the debate, or did it just continue the back and forth? Friedman didn't just counter arguments. He eliminated them permanently. The socialists he debated didn't have comebacks, not because they were stupid, but because Friedman had exposed a fundamental logical flaw in their entire framework. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's the shocking truth. The 10 quotes we're about to explore aren't just Friedman's greatest hits. They're a complete training program in economic thinking. Quote number 10 teaches you one weapon. Quote number 5 adds 3 more. By quote number 1, you'll possess the full arsenal, not memorized scripts, but transferable principles you can apply to any economic debate, any policy proposal, any socialist claim. You know that feeling when someone says, "We just need the rich to pay their fair share," and you know it's wrong but can't articulate exactly why? That ends today. You know that frustration when someone claims European healthcare proves government works better and you fumble the response? That ends in the next 18 minutes. Because Friedman didn't just win debates. He taught a method, and that method is learnable. Let's discover it together. I know you're exhausted. Exhausted by being told capitalism is greedy, markets are cruel, socialism is compassionate. Exhausted by progressive friends who've never read an economics book lecturing you about market failures. Exhausted by politicians promising that this time, government intervention will work differently. You're not wrong to be frustrated. The gaslighting is real. The economic confusion is deliberate. And you're right to seek intellectual clarity. Here's my promise. By the end of this video, you won't just have 10 memorable quotes. You'll understand why each one worked. The logical principle, the empirical evidence, the methodological framework. You'll be able to construct your own Friedman-style arguments for situations he never faced. If you want to master economic thinking that cuts through political manipulation, subscribe to this channel where we explore the methodologies of history's greatest defenders of liberty. Because what Friedman understood, what we're about to discover together, changes everything. Before we dive into the quotes, you need to understand what made Friedman uniquely devastating in debates. It wasn't just intelligence. Plenty of smart economists existed. It wasn't just free market conviction. Lots of people believed in capitalism. What separated Friedman was his systematic methodology for destroying bad ideas. First principle, follow the incentives. When someone proposed a government program, Friedman didn't ask, what are the intentions? He asked, what behaviors will this actually reward? This simple shift annihilated most socialist arguments because they depended entirely on good intentions, matching more than structural incentives. Imagine you're debating someone about rent control. They say, we need it to help poor people afford housing. The standard response is, but it reduces housing supply. True, but that continues the debate. Friedman's response cuts deeper. You're creating an incentive for landlords to let buildings deteriorate, convert to condos, or exit the market entirely. You're guaranteeing that 10 years from now, the poorest people have even fewer options. Your compassion is mathematically guaranteed to harm the people you claim to help. See the difference? You didn't just counter their argument. You showed how their own stated goal ensures the opposite outcome. That's not debatable. That's economic logic. Second principle, compare actual outcomes, not promises. Socialists always debated in the realm of theory, if we had perfect planners or in an ideal system. Friedman dragged every debate into empirical reality. He had the data memorized. He knew what actually happened when governments implemented price controls in 1971, when they expanded welfare in 1965, when they created public housing in 1949. This is why his debates were so devastating to watch. The socialists would paint a beautiful picture of government solving problems. Friedman would calmly respond, "That's a lovely theory. Now let me show you the actual data from when we tried exactly that." Then he'd systematically demonstrate that every single promise failed, every prediction proved wrong, every outcome worsened the problem it claimed to solve. Third principle, force them to defend the indefensible. Friedman had a genius for taking the socialist logic and following it to its inevitable conclusion. If government should control healthcare because it's too important for markets, then by that logic, shouldn't government control food production? After all, food is more essential than healthcare. You die faster without food than without medicine. Suddenly, the socialist is defending why food should be privatized, but healthcare shouldn't. And their entire argument collapses because the principle they stated can't be consistently applied. Notice what Friedman did. He didn't argue his position directly. He showed that their position, taken seriously, leads to conclusions even they won't defend. That's intellectual checkmate. You know what fascinates me most about this methodology? It's completely learnable. You don't need Friedman's genius IQ or his encyclopedic knowledge. You need his framework. Follow incentives, cite actual outcomes, expose logical contradictions. These three tools, which we'll see deployed in every quote we examine, can be applied by anyone to any economic debate. A high school student with Friedman's methodology beats a PhD economist without it, because the methodology is just rigorous honesty about how human behavior and economic systems actually work. Here's what's really beautiful. Once you learn to think this way, you can't stop. You'll watch a politician promise that price controls will lower costs, and you'll automatically think, but that changes supplier incentives, which means you'll hear someone claim government just needs better people running it, and you'll automatically recall the actual track record of every government program ever attempted. Friedman didn't just win debates. He taught a way of seeing economic reality that makes bad ideas impossible to believe. Now, let's see this methodology in action. Starting with quote number 10. Quote number 10. A society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom before equality will get a high degree of both. This came from Friedman's response to socialists arguing that economic inequality justified government redistribution. They claimed freedom was meaningless without equality. Watch the logical architecture here. Friedman didn't argue that equality was unimportant. He showed that pursuing it through coercion guarantees you lose both values. Because enforcing equality requires giving government massive power to confiscate wealth, control economic decisions, dictate outcomes. That power doesn't disappear after achieving equality. It becomes permanent. And power concentrated enough to enforce equality is power concentrated enough to destroy freedom. The reverse is empirically provable. Free societies, Hong Kong pre-China, post-war West Germany, modern Singapore, achieve remarkable equality of opportunity and rising living standards for everyone, even if outcomes varied. Freedom creates the conditions for broad prosperity. Coerce equality creates universal poverty. Application. When someone says we need government to reduce inequality, respond, show me one example where government gained power to enforce economic equality and didn't become authoritarian. Show me one example where economic freedom didn't raise living standards for the poorest better than redistribution did. The evidence runs entirely one direction. Quote number 9. If you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. This sounds like a joke. It's actually a compressed empirical argument about government incentive structures. Private businesses face profit and loss. Screw up resource allocation, you go bankrupt. Get it right, you profit. This feedback mechanism, painful but effective, ensures efficiency over time. Government faces no such constraint. Mismanage resources catastrophically, and the response is increased budget next year, because clearly you need more money to solve the crisis you created. Think about the incentives this creates. A private desert sand company that created a sand shortage would be immediately replaced by competitors. A government sand agency that created a shortage would argue this proves we need a bigger government sand agency with more regulatory power. Real-world example, the U.S. Postal Service versus FedEx and UPS. Same service, package delivery. The private companies make profits, innovate constantly, track packages in real time, deliver on time. USPS loses billions annually, resists innovation, and requires constant bailouts. Not because postal workers are worse humans, because the incentive structure makes efficiency impossible and failure consequence-free. Quote number 8. Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program. Here, Friedman exposed the political economy of government expansion. Programs get sold as emergency, temporary measures. Income tax, temporary to fund World War I. Social Security, temporary until Depression ended. COVID restrictions, 2 weeks to flatten the curve. What actually happens? Temporary becomes permanent because constituencies form around every program. People get employed by it, benefit from it, develop expectations around it. Politicians gain power through it. An emergency that justified it, either redefined to be ongoing or replaced by a new emergency requiring the program's continuation. Evidence. Name one temporary government program that actually ended when the emergency passed. You can't, because there aren't any. Meanwhile, we still have wartime telephone excise taxes from the Spanish-American War of 1898. That's not hyperbole. We literally still pay a tax from a war that ended 125 years ago. Quote number 7. One of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than their results. This is the nuclear bomb Friedman dropped on every progressive policy debate. Socialists build entire arguments on compassion and good intentions. We want to help the poor, minimum wage. We want affordable housing, rent control. We want to help struggling industries, bailouts and subsidies. Friedman's response: I don't care what you want. Show me what actually happened when you implemented this policy. Minimum wage? Reduce employment for the least skilled workers, the exact people you claim to help. Rent control? Created housing shortages and deteriorating quality, harming renters. Industry bailouts? Rewarded failure and guaranteed future irresponsibility. The methodology: every time someone proposes government intervention, ask one question. When has this worked before? Demand specific examples with measured outcomes. Watch how quickly the debate ends. Let me show you something fascinating. Take any major social problem America faces. Now trace the history of government attempts to solve it. You'll find the same pattern every single time. Problem exists, government intervention solves it. Problem gets worse. Government says this proves we need more intervention. Problem becomes catastrophic. Original problem blamed on market failure or insufficient government action. Quote number 6. The government solution to a problem is usually as bad as the problem and very often makes the problem worse. Healthcare. Before massive government intervention, Medicare and Medicaid in 1965. Healthcare consumed 5% of GDP and was broadly affordable. After decades of government solutions, it's 18% of GDP, costs are crushing families, and progressives claim this proves we need government-run healthcare. The government intervention that created the crisis is prescribed as a cure. Education. Federal Department of Education created in 1979 to improve schools. Since then, inflation-adjusted spending per student tripled. Results? Test scores flat or declining. Illiteracy rising, system obviously broken. Progressive response? We need more federal spending on education. Friedman understood why this pattern repeats. Government doesn't face market discipline. Private sector failure gets corrected through bankruptcy and competition. Government failure gets rewarded with bigger budgets and more power. The incentive structure guarantees that government solutions perpetuate themselves while worsening underlying problems. Your debate weapon. When someone says government needs to fix this, ask them to name one major area where decades of government intervention made things better, not worse. Watch them struggle to find a single example. Quote number 5. The most important single central fact about a free market is that no exchange takes place unless both parties benefit. This quote destroys the entire socialist framework in one sentence. Socialists view markets as exploitation. One side wins, the other loses. Rich get richer by taking from the poor. Corporations profit by harming workers and consumers. Zero-sum thinking pervades every socialist argument. Friedman showed this is mathematically wrong. In voluntary exchange, both parties profit or the exchange doesn't happen. When you buy a sandwich for $8, you value the sandwich more than $8, or you wouldn't buy it. And the seller values $8 more than the sandwich, or they wouldn't sell it. Both sides benefit. That's not exploitation. That's mutual gain. Now, contrast with government. When government taxes you, is it voluntary? Do both parties benefit? When government regulates your industry out of business, do you benefit? When government inflates the currency and devalues your savings, did you consent? Government action is always coercive. Someone wins, someone loses, and the losers have no choice. Markets create mutual benefit. Government creates winners and losers by force. Here comes the really interesting part. This explains why free market societies grow wealthy and socialist societies stay poor. Markets multiply wealth through billions of mutually beneficial exchanges. Government redistributes existing wealth through force, creating no new value. One system makes the pie bigger. The other fights over a shrinking pie. Quote number 4. Hell hath no fury like a bureaucrat scorned. Friedman rarely gets quoted for this one, but it's devastating in debates about government reform. The permanent bureaucracy is the greatest obstacle to reducing government, not because bureaucrats are evil, because they're rational actors responding to incentives. Their jobs, pensions, power, and status depend on government expansion. Try to eliminate a government program, and watch what happens. The bureaucrats running it leak to media about how elimination will cause catastrophe. They activate the constituencies benefiting from the program. They slow walk the elimination while documenting every problem as evidence it can't be done. They outlast the political reformers through sheer persistence. Real example, Gray's Commission in 1982 identified $424 billion in potential government savings. Almost none were implemented, not because they weren't valid, because the bureaucracy successfully defended itself. Application, when debating government reform, acknowledge this obstacle openly. Yes, eliminating this department would save taxpayers billions and improve services. But the 50,000 bureaucrats employed by it will fight to the death to preserve it. That's not a reason to keep bad policy. It's a reason to understand how hard real reform is. If this methodological training is helping you see economic debates differently, hit like so more people can access this framework and defend liberty with clarity instead of confusion. Quote number 3. A major source of objection to a free economy is precisely that it gives people what they want instead of what a particular group thinks they ought to want. This is Friedman at his most philosophically devastating. He's exposing the psychological root of all socialist thought. The belief that an enlightened elite should override the choices of ordinary people. Notice what happens in every progressive policy argument. They claim to help the poor or working families, but the actual effect is restricting those people's choices. Minimum wage laws prevent workers from accepting jobs below the mandated rate. even if the worker wants a job and the experience. Occupational licensing prevents people from starting businesses, even if customers want the service. Rent control prevents landlords and tenants from agreeing on mutually acceptable prices. The pattern is always the same. People are making choices we don't approve of, so we need government to prevent those choices. Concrete example: food stamps, known as SNAP, used to be actual stamps that could only buy approved foods. Why? Because progressive policymakers didn't trust poor people to make their own food choices. When the program switched to debit-style card with fewer restrictions, progressive groups fought it because people might buy unhealthy food. The stated goal is helping the poor. The revealed preference is controlling the poor. Friedman's genius was making this explicit. Socialism isn't about helping people. It's about a certain class of people, intellectuals, bureaucrats, politicians, imposing their preferences on everyone else. The free market lets people choose what they actually want. Socialism enforces what elites think they should want. Your weapon. When someone argues for government intervention, ask, are you saying people are too stupid to make this choice themselves? Or are you saying you know better than they do what they should choose? Watch them tie themselves in knots trying to avoid admitting the elitist assumption their entire argument rests on. Quote number 2. The great virtue of a free market system is that it does not care what color people are. It does not care what their religion is. It only cares whether they can produce something you want to buy. This quote destroys the socialist claim that markets perpetuate discrimination while government promotes equality. Friedman showed that discrimination is expensive in free markets. If you refuse to hire the best candidate because of race, gender, or religion, your competitor who hires based solely on merit will outperform you. If you refuse to sell to customers based on irrelevant characteristics, you lose revenue to competitors who serve everyone. Market forces punish discrimination through profit and loss. Government has the opposite incentive structure. Discrimination costs government nothing. They're spending other people's money and face no competition. And historically, government enforced discrimination through law. Jim Crow segregation, Japanese internment, anti-Chinese immigration restrictions, discriminatory occupational licensing. The empirical evidence is overwhelming. The most competitive, market-driven industries, tech, finance, entertainment, desegregated fastest. The most government-controlled industries, education, civil service, military, were the slowest to desegregate. Not because government workers were more racist, because market competition punished discrimination while government monopoly protected it. Modern application. Look at discriminatory government policies today. Occupational licensing disproportionately prevents minorities from starting businesses. Minimum wage laws disproportionately unemploy young black workers. Zoning laws disproportionately restrict housing in minority neighborhoods. The government solutions to discrimination consistently harm the groups they claim to help. Here's what Friedman understood that most people miss. Racism is evil, but the question isn't does racism exist? It's which system minimizes racism's economic impact. Free markets punish racists by making discrimination costly. Government protects racists by removing market discipline. You know what's really powerful about this argument? It doesn't require claiming people aren't racist or discrimination doesn't exist. It shows that even with racism, markets create better outcomes than government control. Debate application. When someone claims free markets perpetuate inequality while government promotes equality, ask them to explain why the most heavily regulated industries controlled by government show the least economic mobility, while the most market-driven industries show the most. Ask them to explain why government-controlled education systems have massive racial achievement gaps while competitive industries show convergence. The data contradicts their entire framework. And now we arrive at quote number 1. I am in favor of cutting taxes under any circumstances and for any excuse, for any reason, whenever it's possible. The reason is because I believe the big problem is not taxes. The big problem is spending. The question is, how do you hold down government spending? Government spending is the real tax. This is a nuclear warhead Friedman dropped on every fiscal policy debate. It revolutionizes how you think about government, taxes, and economic policy. Most people think the debate is about tax rates. Progressives want higher taxes on the rich. Conservatives want lower taxes on everyone. The whole political conversation centers on taxation. Friedman showed this entire debate is looking at the wrong thing. The real issue isn't how much government collects in taxes. It's how much government spends. Because government spending is taxation, regardless of how it's financed. Think about the logic carefully. Government has 3 ways to finance spending. Method 1, direct taxation. They take money from your paycheck. You see it and feel it. Method 2, borrowing. They sell bonds. You don't feel it today, but you'll pay it back later through future taxes. It's deferred taxation. You're still paying, just not yet. Method 3, inflation. They print money, which devalues every dollar you own. This is the cruelest tax because it's invisible and hits the poorest hardest. Their savings evaporate, their wages by less, and they don't even realize government caused it. See Friedman's insight? All 3 methods extract resources from the private sector to government. The real tax is total government spending, not just the amount collected through official taxation. How? They finance it just determines who pays and when. This reframes every fiscal debate. When progressives say, we just need to tax the rich more to pay for this program, Friedman's response is, you're still taking $1 trillion from productive economy to government. Whether you do that through income taxes, borrowing, or inflation, you're still redirecting $1 trillion in resources. The question isn't tax rates. It's whether government spending $1 trillion creates more value than the private sector spending $1 trillion. And the empirical answer is devastating. No, government spending consistently creates less value than private spending. Why? Back to incentives. Private sector money gets spent on what consumers actually want. If businesses misallocate resources, they go bankrupt. Government money gets spent on what politicians want. If they misallocate resources, they request bigger budgets. Let me show you this with real numbers. In 2022, the federal government spent $6.27 trillion. They collected about $4.9 trillion in taxes. The difference, $1.37 trillion, was borrowed and will be paid by future taxation or inflated away through money printing. Did you pay that $1.37 trillion? Absolutely. Either you'll pay it later through higher taxes, or you're paying it right now through 8% inflation, devaluing your savings and wages. The government spending of $6.27 trillion is the real tax, regardless of how they finance it. Here's why this argument destroys socialism. Socialists always frame debates as, don't you want to help people? They propose spending programs and claim anyone opposing them is heartless. But Friedman showed the right question is, does government spending help people better than if they kept their money and spent it themselves? And the answer, based on every available piece of evidence, is no. Government spends your money worse than you would spend it yourself. Every single time. Your ultimate weapon. When someone proposes a government program, don't argue about whether it's a good idea in theory. Ask, government will need to take resources from the private economy to fund this. Do you believe government will create more value with those resources than the people who earn them? Show me your evidence that government spending is more efficient than private spending. I'll wait. They can't answer because the evidence runs entirely the other direction. Government spending is the real tax, and it's a tax on efficiency, prosperity, and human flourishing. This is the intellectual framework that makes you unbeatable in economic debates. Not because you've memorized facts, because you understand the logical structure of how economics actually works. You came into this video thinking you knew how Friedman destroyed socialism. You'd seen the clips. You'd heard the stories. Maybe you share his quotes on social media when progressives talk about taxing the rich or implementing Medicare for all. But now you see something completely different, don't you? Those 10 quotes aren't just clever comebacks. They're a complete intellectual system for understanding economic reality and demolishing bad ideas. Each quote contains multiple layers. The surface level, a memorable phrase that sounds good and gets shared. The logical level, a framework for analyzing any economic policy by following incentives, comparing actual outcomes and exposing contradictions. The empirical level, mountains of historical evidence showing what actually happens when governments intervene versus when markets operate freely. The philosophical level, fundamental truths about human nature, knowledge, and the limits of central planning. You're not the same person who clicked this video, because you now possess the methodology that made Friedman devastating in debates. It's not about memorizing his lines, though they're worth remembering. It's about thinking the way he thought. When you see a policy proposal now, you automatically ask Friedman's questions. What incentives does this create? What happened when we tried this before? Where does this logic lead if we follow it consistently? Who really benefits? What are we not seeing? That grocery store conversation with your progressive brother-in-law about corporate greed causing inflation? You now know exactly how to respond. Show me the evidence that corporate greed increased in 2021. Show me why this same greed didn't cause inflation in 2019. Or consider the alternative explanation. Government printed $4.5 trillion, which increased money supply by 25%, which is a literal definition of inflation. Evidence or theory, which matters more? That friend who insists Scandinavian social democracy proves socialism works? You have Friedman's framework. Those countries have freer markets than the US in many areas, easier to start businesses, no minimum wage, school choice. Their social spending is funded by wealth created through capitalism, and they're all moving away from the welfare state model because it's fiscally unsustainable. Would you like to compare actual policies or continue discussing mythology? The transformation isn't that you have better sound bites. It's that you see economic reality clearly and can articulate that clarity to others. That's what Friedman gave us. That's what these 10 quotes taught you today. From now on, when you encounter economic policy debates, and in America today, you encounter them daily, you'll use Friedman's 3-step methodology. Step 1, follow the incentives. Someone proposes government student loan forgiveness. Don't argue about fairness. Ask, what incentive does this create for future students in universities? If students know loans will be forgiven, do they borrow more or less? If universities know students can borrow infinitely because forgiveness is coming, do they control costs or raise prices? Follow the logic chain to an inevitable conclusion. Proposal guarantees higher costs and more debt. Not maybe, mathematically guaranteed. Step 2, cite actual outcomes. Someone claims rent control helps the poor afford housing. Don't debate theory. Respond. Let's look at every city that implemented rent control. New York, San Francisco, Stockholm, Berlin. What actually happened? Housing shortages, deteriorating building quality, black markets, frozen mobility. Not in one city. In every single city. That's not coincidence. That's evidence. Make them defend the theory against the overwhelming empirical record. Step 3. Expose logical contradictions. Someone argues government should control healthcare because it's too essential to leave to markets. Apply their logic consistently. Food is more essential than healthcare. You die faster without food. By your logic, shouldn't government control all food production and distribution? If not, why not? What principle distinguishes healthcare from food? Watch them struggle to articulate a consistent principle. Because there isn't one, their argument collapses under its own logic. Practice this framework on every policy debate you encounter this week. You'll be astonished how quickly you dismantle arguments that previously left you fumbling for responses. You're not becoming Friedman. You're becoming the best version of yourself, armed with tools that reveal economic truth. There's a Friedman quote I return to constantly, one that didn't make the top 10 but captures everything we discover today. The most important ways in which I think the internet will affect a big issue is that it will make it more difficult for government to collect taxes. Do you feel the profound optimism in that statement? Friedman understood that truth, once discoverable, becomes unstoppable. The internet makes economic truth accessible to everyone. You don't need a PhD from Harvard. You don't need permission from legacy media. You can learn real economics, examine actual evidence, and discover for yourself what works and what doesn't. That's why you're here. That's why channels like this exist. Because somewhere in America, someone is searching for economic clarity in a world of deliberate confusion. They're tired of being told inflation is Putin's fault when they understand money printing causes inflation. They're tired of being called heartless for opposing minimum wage when they've seen how it destroys entry-level jobs. They're searching for intellectual tools to defend economic truth. You just received those tools. 10 quotes. 1 complete methodology. Unlimited applications. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue discovering the wisdom of thinkers like Friedman, people who dedicated their lives to understanding how free societies flourish and unfree societies fail. Next week, we'll explore Friedman's monetary theory and why the Federal Reserve is the greatest threat to American prosperity. You won't want to miss it. Until then, may you see clearly, think rigorously, and articulate truth with Friedman's clarity and conviction. The battle for economic freedom is fought first in the realm of ideas, and now you're armed for that battle. Welcome to Economic Clarity. Everything changes from here.